Good evening and welcome. Thanks. It's a wonderful crowd here this evening. My name is Byron Schlomock. I'm the director for the Center for Economic Prosperity here at the Goldwater Institute. And just, again, thank you for coming. We're here to talk about, I think our lights went off by accident, but I'm not positive. At the moment, I can still see, but anyway. We're here to talk about this evening basically an important issue about the cost of government, public pensions, public employee benefits, and their costs, and what the future holds for us in those areas. There was an old social contract where public employees, and I used to be one, in Texas, expected to be paid a little less for what they did compared to the private sector. In exchange, they got pretty nice benefits, a good, secure job, and good retirement benefits and good health benefits. Today, though, the social contract has been broken for several years now. On average, public employee salaries have exceeded the average salary for private employees. Just to give you a little bit of context, I did a recent short paper on the state pensions situation. And I found out that on top of state employee salaries, taxpayers are paying an additional 9.8% of that salary level to the pension systems at the state level. That's a total of $173.6 million a year. And if we were contributing instead the average of the private sector 401k contribution, which is 3% of salary, we would save $120 million every year. Right now, when you look at just the state-maintained system of the public safety personnel retirement system, there's an elected official retirement program, a corrections officers retirement program, as well as the big one, which is the Arizona State Retirement System. Right now, we're paying about $920 million a year more into those pension systems than we did in 2003. In 2003, it was arguably too little. We were underfunding the system. But that just gives you an example of where we seem to be headed. Under PSPRS right now, the city of Bisbee, for its fire department, contributes on top of salary 41% of that salary. Phoenix City, for the fire department, 23.5%. Police department the same, 23.5%. On top of payroll, that's the percentage of payroll paid. The DPS at the state level, 28.8%. And of course, there are other workplace benefits like civil service protections and health care. Now, here to talk about it, we have some esteemed guests. Steven Greenhut, immediately to my right, is an author. He wrote this book, Plunder: How Public Employee Unions Are Raiding Treasuries, Controlling Our Lives, and Bankrupting the Nation. To some extent, he's from California. He is he's a director at the Pacific Research Institute's Journalism Center. He's a senior fellow, by the way, more famously, for the Goldwater Institute. And I think what you'll find is that as much as anything, he'll tell us sort of the logical conclusion of where we're headed, which is California, unfortunately, and talk about some solutions. Speaker Kirk Adams, to his right, well, he was honorable, but now he's not. He's resigned from the Arizona House to run for Congress, so he's trying to be honorable again. But he was the primary force really behind Senate Bill, got a Senate Bill designation, but anyway, Senate Bill 1609, which did some reforming to our pension systems here in Arizona. And then finally, to his right, Sal Diciccio. He's currently honorable. He's been honorable, not honorable, and now honorable again. City Councilman for District 6 in Phoenix. And he's been a tireless champion for the taxpayer in the city and has tried to make known to the community just exactly where our costs are when it comes to public employees and how the city has managed under the current recession, how they manage their budget and everything. And tried to uncover some things that we might not otherwise know had he not been there. Now, these are all the short version of the introductions. You can find their biographies online. Councilman Diciccio's is on the City of Phoenix website. Speaker Adams, well, he has his own website now. And Steven Greenhut's is on the Pacific Research Institute website. So we're going to start with Steven Greenhut. Each of these speakers have 20 minutes, and if you'll be patient, we'll have a question and answer period at the end. Thank you very much. Steven?
I looked at Byron's excellent study on diffusing the pension bomb, and then I read the Arizona numbers. You guys are pikers. We have a $500 billion unfunded pension liability. That's just for pensions. Don't even start on medical costs. According to Stanford, a small institution of no note, right? You remember the cops used to have something called a Scared Straight program, where they would take at-risk youth, as they would call it, to a jail to scare them so that they don't pursue a life of crime. Well, I've suggested we have a Scared Straight program where we take every taxpayer to the California legislature, where I get to sit and watch them debate. I think this week, while the budget is in the mess that you probably see, they are banning shark fins or something. I don't even understand. Okay. What we have seen, basically what's happened here, all these numbers, we deal in all these numbers. I wrote the book because I didn't think people were paying enough attention to the issue, and now all of a sudden it's exploded. Running out of money seems to focus the mind. So we've seen a massive transfer of wealth from the private sector to the public sector, and that's just what's been happening, and especially in California. And again, we're the warning side. You're headed in our direction. Our residents are heading in your direction. But we've seen this massive transfer in the last 10 years especially. And we've also, and this is another point in the book that I think needs to be discussed more, we've seen a massive transfer in power from the individuals to functionaries working for the state, and that's not good for freedom. It's a down economy. People are starting to notice. These local liabilities are incredible, and we're seeing programs being cut. So it's starting to, again, focus the mind. And we've also seen that government employees have become a protected class. I can't tell you how many grievous acts of misbehavior we see constantly, and the unions, they support their worst actors, and they don't allow any sort of reform. On the California budget, Jerry Brown he's cutting back cell phones for state workers, and he's tinkering. These are good for sound bites, and nothing wrong with that. But we're talking about saving a few dollars here and there. But the kind of things that would save massive amounts of money, contracting out, the kinds of things that the Goldwater Institute, my company, the Pacific Research Institute, talk about, we can't even talk about those things. You can't even, there was a bill in the California legislature that would have just stopped pensions for employees who were committed felonies on the job, like the mafia cops, as they were called. That went nowhere. It didn't have a prayer. So how are we going to have public services that are in any way functioning in a normal way? And so basically, there's not, the numbers make our case just resoundingly. The lack of accountability is making our case. We're looking at the budget issues. And yet the other side really doesn't have anything. So what are they doing? And I've debated union guys. I just had a debate with the head of the union, and in Orange County, my old stomping grounds, and he admitted afterwards that he doesn't have, he had the weaker side of the argument. I'm like, well, then you're wrong, so change your mind. But that didn't really work. So they're working now on emotionalism. That's what they're left with, trying to shame us. There's something called Don't Scapegoat Us in California. It's a website that some of the union guys have started, and they put pictures of different right-wingers on what they call right-wingers. Remember, everyone's a right-winger to them. On goats, I don't even understand what the purpose of it is, but 3 of the right-wingers on there are liberal Democrats who happen to be extremely upset that public services are being slashed and burned so that we can pay retired cops and firefighters $175,000 or more in retirement, lifetime. There's also something, a real actuarial term called the Viagra effect. Have you all heard of that? The public employees are retiring at such a young age, and then they're marrying even younger people, and then the taxpayer's on the hook for the life of the younger spouse, and until so anyway, that's having to be figured into the calculation on how much it's costing taxpayers. So anyway, what they're doing now is all sorts of emotional gimmicks. There was a suicide of a city employee who may or may not have been laid off in the city of Costa Mesa in Orange County. Has a huge pension liability. They're outsourcing some of the employees. I mean, they're running out of money, so they've been kind of playing that up. People who talk about pensions now have blood on their hands, but we really have to stand up to that and not be cowed into silence, because we're really trying to protect the public services. Now we might all have disagreements on how many public services there ought to be. I'm a libertarian. I'm probably on the fewer is always the right answer side. But at the same token, we can argue over how big government ought to be. But most of the money ought not to be going to 50-year-olds who are retired with multimillionaire pensions. In the city of San Diego, 70% of the 70% of the payroll budget goes to retirees. Now think about that. Imagine those of you, I'm sure a lot of you are in private enterprise here. If you paid 70 cents on every payroll dollar that you pay out for somebody who's luxuriating at the beach for the rest of their life, I imagine that you wouldn't be providing a very competitive service. Somebody else would be beating you out. But in government, never goes out of business. And even when it does go out of business, it never goes out of business. Like in the city of Vallejo, San Francisco Bay Area, went bankrupt. And so what are they doing? They're shutting down fire stations. They're slashing police services. Of course, imposing cuts on the public. And those of us who call for pension reform and other reform in the system, we're the ones called anti-public safety. We just believe that this system ought to be sustainable and that it ought to be, I'm not arguing that anyone ought not to be paid a fair amount, but when you have 22,000 applicants for every firefighter opening, as we do in California, that would suggest something slightly out of balance. When they open Qualcomm Stadium for those applicants to wait in line, it's like hitting the lottery when you get these government jobs, and it's just not right, and it doesn't say anything very good about our society. I mean, the public servants are not supposed to be our masters. They should be treated fairly. They should have a fair amount of pay. But they work for us, and something's gotten turned on its head. Well, anyway, I moved from lovely Orange County to Sacramento to watch the train wreck. I thought it would be entertaining, and it is entertaining. There's plenty to write about. I just walked down to the Capitol. But the pension issue has been increasingly big issue. But our governor, Jerry Brown, just recently signed a deal with the prison guards union, who have pretty much had their way with virtually every governor, Republican or Democrat. And it's just another giveaway. They're allowed to bank an unlimited amount of vacation time, the Sacramento Bee, and then walk away with a huge check on retirement. The Sacramento Bee reported that some employees are walking away with $800,000 checks in addition to their retirements. And the union people, I debate union people all the time. And I always say they're nice people, many of them, not all of them, but they're wrong on this issue. And we're spending an enormous amount of money that could be spent on other things, on public services, tax breaks, making our state more competitive. Okay. Anyway, the public employees always say that it's not a real debt. We know how the unfunded liabilities are calculated. It's based on a guess on the return on investment. CalPERS, which is the largest public employee retirement system in the country, I call it the gift that keeps on giving. Their front page corruption stories are really entertaining when you consider the fact that they're always lecturing private enterprise on ethical investment policies and so forth. But they're making a guess based on the return on investment. So the returns are usually so high that if any of us were offered a chance to invest at 8 or 9% guaranteed rate of return, we would probably take it on most of our money. But so the union people say, well, it's not a real debt because it fluctuates based on the economy and rates of return. So okay, I say if it's not a real debt, let's not pay it. Then it's not a real debt. And they're not really thrilled with that. So it's a crazy way to determine how to pay pensions, such a big obligation on the public. We're government officials, elected officials, are very scared of the unions. I've seen it when I reported in Orange County, and I used to watch local government in action, and that could be one word or two. But watching local governments, everyone should go to a planning commission meeting, by the way, or a local education meeting. I remember going to a local school board meeting, and the only people there other than the board members were some of the union people who were sitting there with their arms crossed and their T-shirts or whatever union they were members of. And you could guarantee that they got their way because the people on the school board know that those are the people paying attention, and those are the people who are going to assure that they're defeated in the next election. And I see it at the local level, the police, the fire unions. After 9/11, it all went out the window. I saw in Laguna Beach, which is one of the most luxurious, nice communities in the nation, really, and the firefighters rented a fire truck and put pictures of the 9/11 tragedy all over the fire truck as a way to guilt the city manager and the city council into granting them an even higher level of retirement benefits. Now, they're abusing that. They're abusing that sad tragedy for personal gain, and I don't think that's appropriate. And yet, I've seen it. I've seen the police do the same thing in their letters during negotiating time. We just had my old newspaper, the Orange County Register, just did a story about how lifeguards in Orange County get $200,000 a year, and they can retire at age 50 with 90% of their final year's pay. And of course, that's before all the many, many pension spiking gimmicks. There was one police agency, I think it was in Orange County, the main disability, and we're talking 2/3 to 100% of people, depending on which agency, retire with disabilities, which covers half of their retirement income no longer is taxed, and they get an extra year off. I mean, it's an incredible abuse. In one agency, irritable bowel syndrome was the most popular. It's usually knees or back injuries, and virtually every police chief, I still offer to take anyone out to lunch who could introduce me to a police chief who was retired, not on a disability. There was one in Orange County who dropped a briefcase on his toe and went off on disability. And it's just incredible. The abuses are incredible. And these things they're funny in a way, but it's really sad because what's happened it's like rust. It never sleeps. There's always this pushing in the legislature of this quietly pushing this agenda. Like, for instance, in the middle of all this pension mess that we're seeing, a bill soared through the legislature that expanded the cancer and the heart attack presumptions. Now, if I get a heart attack, and I try not to get too upset about this stuff, or else I would have had one by now, and I don't recommend people with high blood pressure reading my book. But if I get a heart attack or I get cancer, it's usually probably because of my not very good lifestyle or my genetics. If you're a firefighter, retired firefighter, or a police officer, it's presumed to be job-related. And they just keep expanding. There was a bill that expanded this, I think, until a person was in their 80s. So if you're 80 and you get cancer, it's presumed to be, in this legislation, to be caused by your job, and then that opens up a whole bunch of additional benefits. So these are the kind of things that keep going forward. The category of public safety worker, which gets the enhanced retirement benefit, keeps expanding. Now, milk inspectors in California, billboard inspectors are considered public safety. If you've ever been arrested by a cop, I guess you would be public safety. If you've looked at a cop, if you're I'm kidding, but it just keeps expanding because these things can expand quietly. And nobody's going to really get up in arms if you expand the cancer presumption by a few years or expand the category of public safety workers. One of the reasons these type of deals go forward at the local level, and I've seen it, is first off, the unions elect their own bosses. So they dump a ton of money into the campaigns. I saw, races that should be won. There was a county supervisor race, $200,000. The union dumped well over $1 million into. So how do you fight that? So of course most elected officials just roll over and they do what the unions want. And then once the unions have elected their own bosses, most of these deals that I watched, they're negotiated, of course, in closed session because closed session is, of course, it's a contract. It's personnel. It's not open to public scrutiny legitimately. It shouldn't be that way, but it is legally that way. So what will happen is the unions, the city will negotiate with the unions in closed doors. No one even knows what's going on. And of course, the people who are negotiating on behalf of the taxpayer are usually members of the very union and will benefit by the increase. So it's, oh no, don't stop me from increasing pensions, twist my arm, you know what's going on there. And then what happens is typically the Thursday before the city council meeting, which is usually on a Tuesday in California, they conform with the Public Records Act and Public Meetings Act, and they announce it on a website, item 73, in some sort of gibberish that nobody understands. And then Tuesday, the unions, which have already known about this contract and voted on it, indeed, they show up in force. The public doesn't have a chance. And our courts have ruled repeatedly that once it's voted on, once the august body votes on a deal, it's a binding contract for the life of the employee and their spouse. So that's how we get. So it's this one-way ratchet that just never seems to stop. And now we're running out of money, and the city officials are whining and complaining. And I was reading this LA Times story where one of these city officials is saying, no one ever told us this. We had no idea. I'm like, I'm reading it. I told you. I screamed it at you. We were arguing on the phone. I know people who lobbied you and called you. They know what's going on. They just made a pact. And anyway, and California being a blue state as it is, it's really hard to get sensible legislation. I mean, if we could just stop the craziest legislation, I'd be happy. So it's kind of weird meeting elected officials that seem like reasonable. And I've even heard some people since I've been here mention bills that actually sound like they make sense, because we don't get any of that. So I'm trying to make the case to liberals, because it's mostly liberal state. Our main offices at PRI are in San Francisco. I work in Sacramento, so I'm in San Francisco a lot, and I go to some of the political events there, which are a bit different than Orange County, and they're rather entertaining. This is no lie. I was at a political event. I was introduced to one of the conservatives, and I asked what her business was, and she had an S&M product store. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And she was the conservative. And I'm not making that up. Hey, I don't care. I'm a libertarian. I just thought it was odd. Anyway, I'm making the case to liberals that look, the streets of your beloved city are crumbling. The parks are decrepit. I mean, I love San Francisco. It's a beautiful city. My oldest daughter lives there. It's falling apart. And one of the reasons is they don't have any money for any of the major services that people usually rely upon. Now, the public defender, who's a bona fide liberal, Jeff Adachi, he's promoted one failing pension reform initiative, and now he's promoting another one. And there are some groups of intellectually honest liberals who recognize that if you're paying police $175,000 a year in retirement, that doesn't leave a lot of money for anything else. So that's one line of reasoning. It's a good line of reasoning. It just isn't working that well. The head of the California Foundation for Fiscal Responsibility, Marcia Fritz, is another liberal Democrat. She's been documenting how there are 15,000 members of California's $100,000 pension club, and that number is growing by about 70% a year because the pensions have gotten so rich in the last few years. So what happens is when I get in these debates with public employee union bosses, they'll always say, well, the average retirement in the system's like something like $27,000. Well, the average, sure, that goes back to the Pleistocene era when people were retiring, back when we had normal pensions. And it's true for people who've been in the system for 7 years and people who had it's a mix, it's an average. We know that. First off, the average private sector person only gets $9,000 a year. But of those retiring in the last year or two, the number's around $66,000. And of police and firefighters, it's right in the $100,000 retirement range. So that's why going back to what I started with, they're stuck with emotional arguments. They don't have. So one of the ones I was on the Stossel show, and they brought on talk about a gift. They brought on one of these union guys who said, well, the reason public safety retires so early is we die 3 to 5 years after we retire. Now, I know a lot of guys, they actually believe that because they read their union newsletters, which is always not a good idea. But I actually did the research. I contacted CalPERS, and although they're not a group that I'm real prone towards favoring, they have really great actuarial numbers because they have to know how much debt they're imposing on the public. And they provided me with all the data, and they said, no, it's a complete myth. The longest living public employee is a police officer who lives to be in the low to mid 80s, followed by a firefighter. So they're living, and I wish a long life for everyone, but they're living a really long time, and that's why we have this pension liability, and we're stuck paying for it. So these are the type of untrue emotional arguments that we get that we have to just really be willing to just reject. Okay, well, I guess I'm probably running out of time here. Solutions. One thing I'll say about solutions, because everyone asks. I wrote my book because I thought people weren't talking about the problem. But as far as solutions are concerned, it's not that hard. Pay them less. Make them contribute more. Give them a retirement that's more like us schlubs in the private sector. I mean, the public sector people they're not living in the same economy as we're living in. If the stock market goes up, they do well. If it goes down, they do well. That's what you need to do from a technical standpoint. Also, we have to increase accountability because, as I mentioned earlier, the unions protect their worst actors, and they resist the kind of reforms that we need to impose to improve public services. You've heard of rubber rooms, right? The schools, the LA Times, that noted conservative paper. I'm kidding, but they did a front page story. It's a really great story about how it's impossible to fire teachers in LA Unified. It can take years. They sit in rubber rooms collecting their full benefits and pay. And these are not teachers. They said that they don't even try to fire incompetent teachers. We're talking about teachers credibly accused of crimes and sexual abuse, and it still can take many years to get rid of them. So if we're going to improve our public services, we need to increase accountability. But the big question is, what do we do from a political standpoint? And in California, there are no answers. I mean, we have to elect different people. I don't know what to do. Arizona, I think you still have some hope. You still have a different electorate. And before every last working person in California lives in your state, Nevada, and Utah, I'm hoping we could come up with some solutions. And anyway, thank you for having me. And
Mr. Speaker. Speaker Adams.
Thank you, Byron. Well, it's an honor to be with you this evening. I'm very impressed at the number of people that are here to talk about, in many ways, what is an arcane and very complex issue. But it's also a very emotional issue, and one in which we need to have these honest and forthright discussions about. As we sit here today, I think I can speak for almost all of us in the room with this sense, this feeling that government in America is just simply broken. And there's a lot of empirical data to support this position. Simply look at the deficits, both at the local, the state level, look at the national debt that we're facing. But simply beyond the empirical data and the raw evidence, there's just that gnawing feeling in our gut that something is wrong, that something has changed. Government no longer feels like the servant of the people. It's easy to feel that way, especially as you begin to pull back the layers of government spending and the layers of the public pensions. And when we pull back those covers, you'll find that there's much that we don't like, and there's a lot of reason to worry. Look at Arizona, for example. Our public pension system just 10 years ago had nearly a $5 billion surplus just 10 years ago. But largely as a result of benefit increases, rising salaries, general government growth, and a lot of whistling past the graveyard, that $5 billion surplus in a 10-year period of time has turned into a $10 billion deficit. Now, put that in perspective. Annual state revenues are $8.5 billion. $8.5 billion, all general fund state revenues. Now, the bad news is that $10 billion deficit is the best case scenario for the Arizona pension system. According to the Washington Post, in a story that ran in February of this year, the Arizona pension deficit may be as high as $37 billion. The difference between the $10 billion and the $37 billion is the discount rate that you apply. So pension systems, by common practice, will apply an 8% discount rate over the course of time. Many economists believe that that's way too generous and way too high and recommend only a rate of 5%. I found it interesting that CalPERS, the lead actuary for CalPERS, earlier this year had the temerity to suggest a lowering of the assumed rate in the CalPERS pension system from 7.75% to 7.5%. And a preliminary issued that report. By the time the meeting was held, the actuary's mind had been changed and recommended that they stick at the regular 7.75% rate. This is not just an Arizona problem. It's not just a California problem. The Pew Center for Research, not necessarily considered a bastion of libertarian or conservative thinking, recently estimated that the unfunded pension liabilities, all state governments combined, is at the low end $1 trillion and the high end $1.9 trillion. However much that deficit is, whether it's $1 trillion and 1.9, whether it's 10 billion or 37 billion, this much we do know. Our government pension commitments extend beyond our ability to pay for them. As government pension liabilities consume more of our tax dollars, it literally threatens every other area of government spending. And most of all, it threatens the taxpayer. When it's time to pay the piper, when the bill comes due, who do you think will be asked to pick up the check? It'll be you. It'll be us. It'll be the taxpayer. You cannot raise taxes high enough on this economy or in future economies to cover those liabilities unless you fix those systems. Despite the irrefutable math, the entrenched interests of government unions and progressives will do everything in their power to thwart any attempt at reform. There is no tactic they will not employ, there is no falsehood they will not promote, and there is no emotional string that they will refuse to pull. They understand better than the average public does the enormous financial advantage contained within our modern public pension system, and they will not go easily into the night. The protests and the lawlessness that we saw that engulfed the Wisconsin state capitol earlier this year was the physical demonstration of the brewing battle over the future of America. And I literally believe it is a battle over the future of America. Ultimately, that's what this fight is about. As Representative Paul Ryan puts it, it's a choice between two futures. On one hand, you have a robust private sector that incentivizes success and rewards success. On the other hand, the other future is two classes of people, those who work for the government and those who don't. In the legislature this year, I sponsored a major pension reform package. That package begins to turn the tide. It begins to turn the numbers. It moves government pensions closer to parity with the private sector, not all the way there. It addresses the looming deficits, and it ensures a stable system for those civil servants who rely upon the public pension system for their own retirement. And finally, it provides protections to the taxpayers through fiscal sanity in our pension system. Working with Representative Steve Yarborough, we successfully passed Senate Bill 1609. With this bill, we really wanted to tackle three major problems. First, we wanted to stop the abuses in the system. Examples of that would be some of the double dipping that goes on in some of our state agencies and departments. It also happens at the city levels as well. We wanted to stop the giveaways to politicians. I'll get into that in a little bit later. And for rank and file government workers, we wanted to better align the system to what people receive in the real world. Our plan was large and it was very complex, but I want to share with you some of the items that were included in Senate Bill 1609. First thing it did is it increased the contribution rate the employees would pay for their own retirement. Now, that may sound like a draconian thing to do. The average amount that a private sector employer pays towards their employees' retirement costs, he said it earlier, was 3%. In the state of Arizona, as it is in most of the country, most state employees are on a 50-50 match. 50% from the employer, 50% from the employee. Our public safety sector is more like a three-quarter match, meaning three-quarter from the employer, i.e. you and the government, and a quarter from the individual who will ultimately be receiving that pension. We also, in the bill, only awarded cost of living adjustments if the pension actually has the money to pay the cost of living increase. A novel idea. It was simply this. We wanted to ensure that these underfunded pension systems were not going to pay out cost of living increases for the current pensioners to the detriment of those who are still paying in the system and will someday rely upon that system for their own retirement. It was stealing from one generation over the next. And we also wanted to treat elected officials just like everyone else in the plan. We wanted to disincentivize government from hiring back people, the double dipping that I referred to. And we raised the retirement age in all systems, the public safety systems, as well as the state's largest systems, the Arizona State Retirement System. And then finally, we established in the bill a study under the Treasurer's Office, and I see Treasurer Doug Ducey here today, who I completely trust and I know has the full capability to conduct a study to give recommendations and tell the legislature and the governor how to transition our antiquated, expensive, defined benefit public pension system into a modern defined contribution 401k style system. Our ultimate goal, the ultimate goal of reformers of public pensions should be this, and that is to eliminate the concept of giving government workers a defined benefit. You cannot today receive that defined benefit. Let me give you the example of what that would be like. If I said to you, you have $100,000, I'm going to guarantee you an 8% rate of return. An 8% rate of return, your principal is guaranteed. You will never lose it. If I were selling you an annuity with those terms, how many of you would buy it? I would be a millionaire annuity salesman. Now, what if I told you that that $100,000, you only had to pay $50,000 of that, the rest of it your employer would pay? How many would buy that? Okay. That is the nature of a defined benefit program. There is a reason, friends, why defined benefit programs do not exist in the private sector anymore. It is because they have driven some of the nation's largest companies into bankruptcy. Is there any reason to believe that somehow the math will be different for government than it was for the private sector? There is no reason to believe that. There are many things about my pension reform bill that infuriated union bosses and, frankly, many of my colleagues and politicians in the legislature. But perhaps the one thing that made them the angriest is when I voluntarily took myself out of the public pension system. By removing myself from the public pension system, I voluntarily gave up over $250,000 in pension benefits that would have been paid out to me over the course of my lifetime. Now, here's the kicker. I could begin collecting those pension payments as an elected official after only 5 years of service. Imagine if you could begin collecting your retirement after 5 years of service. Well, the ugly fact is that of the 4 pension systems in Arizona, the public safety system, the Maine State Employee Safety System, which also has our teachers in it, our corrections system, and our elected officials system, the ugly fact is that the richest, the most beneficial one of all is the one for the elected officials. Is it any surprise that a system designed by politicians for politicians is the richest one of all? I felt very strongly as we began this process of putting together this bill and moving it through the legislature that we should employ a what's good for the goose is good for the gander approach. My belief was that if I could demonstrate that I was willing to make dramatic changes to the pension system of my colleagues, my fellow elected officials, and if I was willing to drop my own pension entirely, get rid of it, I felt that maybe the union leadership would see our good faith efforts and join us in saving their system from its own financial ruin. I thought that they would see the math, they would understand our motives, and then they would embrace real reform. And it's at this part where I refer to it as the education of Kirk Adams, because the reality was far different than what I was seeking. In fact, the government unions hired a professional public relations firm to run the opposition campaign. They ran statewide television commercials, and behind the scenes, they employed standard union intimidation tactics. In front of the scenes, in front of the curtain, in front of committees, they engaged in the emotional pandering, claiming that those who supported Senate Bill 1609 and the House equivalent were opposed to firemen and policemen and our heroes. They also made very clear their intentions to exact revenge on those who supported the bill. As the chief sponsor and pusher of that bill, you can imagine what that meant. Even going so far on one occasion to pull aside a member of my staff and say to them that wherever Speaker Adams goes, we will do everything we can to ensure that he never holds public office again. This is the type of fear that the union leadership will try to instill in your elected officials, whether it's at the state level, the federal level, or especially the local level, where they seem to have an outsized influence. Now, those of you who have followed state politics will know that when I assumed the speakership in 2009, it coincided with a very difficult period of time in our state history. In the last 3 years, we've had 10 major budget votes. We've had passed major economic reforms, and we've made many other very big and difficult choices and decisions. But there has never been a bill in that entire period of time that was more difficult to get the votes on and to pass than the pension reform bill. As a matter of fact, the day before I had scheduled that bill for a vote, I had a member of the Republican caucus come into my office and sit down with me and say, "Mr. Speaker, we don't want you to be embarrassed. There are 13 Republicans that will vote no on this bill. You're going to lose it on the floor. You're best not to bring this bill to a vote." Well, I don't like to lose my votes. And so we continued to work the bill, and when we brought that bill to the floor the next day, we had 5 votes more than we needed to pass that pension reform bill. In the end, the bill passed. It went back to the Senate. It passed in the Senate, and it was signed by the governor into law. The system here in Arizona is now on a more sustainable path. Broader reforms through the study under the Treasurer's Department are in the wings, and taxpayers can rest easier but cannot rest completely. The lesson in my mind is this. If the future we desire for this country is one of fiscal soundness and economic vibrancy, then we must elect and support individuals who will no longer kick the can down the road, who will stop ignoring the problems that we face. We have to have honest conversations with the people of this country. We have to talk about in plain terms just what it is that we can afford and what we can no longer afford. And collectively, we have to have the courage to take on the entrenched government unions, come what may. To me, that is the recipe for a future America that I want to live in and I want my children to inherit. Thank you very much.
We need to get the
I'm Italian. I can do things with my hands. I don't. It comes with the territory. It comes with the genes. I do want to thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I've got to tell you, to be up here with a panel such as this, I feel truly honored, and to be with the Goldwater Institute, I'm equally as honored. I saw Clint Bullock in the back over there. Clint's famous saying is one of the sayings he said, at least what I've heard from some of his speeches, says, "Hey, I have the best job in the world. I get to sue government." Well, I have the second best job in the world, Clint. I get to expose government. So I do enjoy it. Let me cover with you at least what it is I want to talk about today and share with you. I saw some of my labor friends in the audience, so I'm going to change my presentation just a little bit. I want to explain why I'm doing what I think is a benefit to those in labor, why we need to do these things. And then I want to talk about what I see as the problem, and then finally end it with what I believe to be the solutions to make things work. And so if you look at the reasons why, our world, our economy, everything changed. Everything changed on us 4 or 5 years ago, right? I mean, we all had a real tough time. All of us had a lot of difficulty. And those individuals that were able to adapted, and they're surviving today. They're making things work. Those individuals that did not adapt, those companies that did not adapt, what happened to them? They went away, right? They went away. The only entity that has really not adapted with this new world, this new economy, this new change, has been government. It really hasn't. It believes that we're going to maintain on this same path, and great change is going to happen. There are two things, just two, that literally have come out in this new economy that we're living in right now that we have got to do in order to adapt for the change. First is we've got to work with strategic speed. That means we've got to be able to adapt with a changing environment, a changing market, to be able to get in and out of things quickly. If we don't do that, we're not going to adapt. The second thing that we must do is be able to get our product to market, right? If you cannot get your product to market in a timely manner, then you're not going to be able to compete in this new world, in this new economy that we're having. The City of Phoenix, and the figures I'm going to be covering and sharing with you are numbers from the City of Phoenix, but you can pretty much apply them to anywhere. I mean, to some degree, every city, every local government is doing this. And some of the things that Steve said here about who runs the show, he's right. The unions run the show. We have low turnout. We have elections in city government that are in August. How many of you here in August? Very few people. The beneficiaries show up. The people that are wedded to the system are the ones that show up for these votes. So a lot of the things that Steve talked about are, I just sat there and I thought, wow, there must be a gene. Someone must have this gene. It must go all around everywhere. But the other thing that Speaker Adams had talked about is you really, if you take on these types of issues, the odds are you're just not going to get reelected. You just aren't. So if your focus is on getting reelected, you're not going to get it. It's more than likely you're going to be put out of office because of the way the system is set up. The system is set up for you not set up for the beneficiaries of the system. So getting back to what we need to do there with strategic speed and getting to market, I put together a bill with the help of Shauna Bullock back there, Steve Bowler with the Free Enterprise Institute, Tom Jenny with Americans for Prosperity. We all worked together, and Speaker Adams helped us out a lot, and really put a bill together that would allow for the first city in the entire country to be able to do those two things: operate on strategic speed, and on the second hand, be able to get your product to market, get people to business as quickly as possible. So now I want you to hold that thought, but not because I'm going to outline to you two problems right off the bat of what's happening in local government. The first part of it, and this side of it right here, deals with the economic part of it, the expense part of it. The second part of it deals with the productivity, the benefit part of it. So I'm going to show you a board here, and I don't want you to be afraid of these numbers. Most of you guys deal with numbers every day. But what these numbers do represent should worry you and should scare you. In the city of Phoenix, we have our average cost per employee. I'm going to work us down this board here for those of you that can see. Our average cost per employee is $100,000 a year. That alone is unsustainable. In the last year, year and a half, the city of Phoenix taxpayers, higher water rate fees, food tax, fees on businesses, have had to have their fee increases and tax increases of $130 million. Now remember, everything's to fund this operation. It's your cost per employee, because that's what we operate in the private sector. The average compensation package in the private sector is $57,000 a year. We have 15,000 employees in the city of Phoenix, a little less than that now when this board was created, averaging $100,000 a year. On your seats, I put the documentation. You'll see it. Those numbers came from Budget and Research. They're not my numbers. They're numbers from Budget and Research. My numbers are higher, quite frankly, but I'm going to use the most conservative numbers today. The average employee in the city of Phoenix in the last 5 years, from 2006, is being compensated today $17,000 more a year today than they were in 2006. How many of you have seen your increases go up that high? Nobody. Most of us in the private sector have seen this. We've seen our incomes drop anywhere between 25 and 50% if we have a job. If we don't have a job, it's 100%. We've seen individuals that are barely making this day by day, week by week, month by month, paycheck by paycheck, and they're barely making it, and we take more out of your pocket. It doesn't work this way. The average cost, not the average cost, the expense for employees, roughly the same amount of employees that we have today that we had 5 years ago, is costing taxpayers $270 million more a year. Today. Now, how many of you heard that the city of Phoenix went through these massive layoffs? Thousands of people were let go. Thousands and thousands. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. It was 15. The 15 was the number. Now, this is the productivity side of the board, okay? Now, this is this was the economic side of it. This is the productivity side. A first-year clerk, and the reason I picked out a first-year clerk is because it's one of the lowest levels you've got in the city of Phoenix. If I picked a manager, they would have said, hey, you're using the highest number, so I used the lowest number. A first-year clerk, when you look at vacation days, sick days, holidays, and personal days off, their first year, they get 40.5 days off the first year. If you're a manager, it's 46 or 48 days. We get fantastic health benefits. Employees get $8,000 a year for tuition reimbursement. We get free bus and rail. And those of you that know I'm not a big bus or rail guy. I fought the transit tax. But you're paying for it now, and I'm paying for it. But our employees get free bus and rail. PEHP, I always forgot, so I had to memorize it because these boards got glued together by my staff, and I wish they wouldn't have done it so I could always look and see what it meant. But now I have to memorize it. It's post-employment health plan. When an employee retires from the city of Phoenix, they can walk away with $76,000 to take care of their health benefits after they retire. And then we get to retire in our 50s after we get to retire. So now, you've got the economic side of it, average cost of $100,000, and continually going because we have merit and we The other thing is, we don't speak English, okay? We We speak in a language that we understand, and it's meant to, I believe, deceive you into what it is. Merit and longevity is just another name for pay raises and bonuses. Every single year, we give merit and longevity pay. Every single year. Every year. It's been going on for years. So now you have the economic side of it. Combine that with the productivity side, where you have to hire more people, you have to pay overtime, or you cut services on individuals. Those two merge together, you got a problem. And I want to tell you something. When we talked about liberals, they get this. Believe me, I've had two individuals just recently that, for whatever reason, they come up to me and say, "Are you Sal Diciccio?" I go, "Yeah, I am." I'm thinking, okay, is this going to be a good conversation or a bad one? but they came up to me, one right on 48th Street in Indian School, and the other one downtown, and they immediately identified themselves and said, "I'm a liberal." I said, "Okay, well, I'm kind of conservative, more libertarian based." But they say, "Well, we support what you're doing." I go, "You do?" It's because of the cuts in programs. It's the cut, and at the City of Phoenix, we cut after-school programs by raising the fees on these kids that could barely make it. 62% of the kids are now back on the street again. So if you support programs like that, you're seeing cuts in those types of programs. So what do we do? What are the problems? Again, we go back to strategic speed and to getting to market. The bill that we worked on, that Shauna and many others worked on, and Nick Dranius, are you here, Nick? The guy's a genius. Okay, the guy is a genius. I mean, genius. Well, we worked on, because there was no way this was going to happen at the city level. So we took it to the state because we thought we'd have a better chance of getting it through. Well, it was a lot harder. I thought we had a lot more friends, but it's hard. It is what it is. We got it through the House, and thank you, Speaker Adams. He worked very hard and tirelessly to get it through, and then we got it through the Senate, and then it got vetoed by the governor, and we can get into that later. I know, that's okay. Those are my other friends. So, but in order for us to compete in this new world, this new market, we are no longer competing, in the city of Phoenix at least, we are no longer competing with Mesa, Keno Hawker, the mayor of Mesa. We're no longer competing with Scottsdale, Peoria, Glendale. Well, maybe that's a bad example. They're not competing with anybody. But we're no longer competing with those entities. We are competing with cities all over the world. For those of us that want to keep our jobs in the city of Phoenix, and I'm speaking directly at you, we've got to change. We've got to adapt ourselves with this changing economy. We've got to be more flexible. So what did the bill do? It said that any cost above $500,000, which is a big number, should be competitively bid out, except for police, fire, judges, prosecutors. As we went through the process, we had to keep taking them out for politics reasons. Otherwise, it wasn't going to get through. 911 operators, but strategic functions. We had to bid those services out. We had to compete with the market. What did that do on the strategic speed side? It allowed us to go in and out of a market. So let's say a function or a program that we did in the city wasn't something that we wanted to do. We could immediately stop that program with a contract and move into something else that the public wanted. It allowed employees to do it. The other thing that it didn't do is it allowed us, because not only are you paying for employees today, but you're paying for them for the next 20, 30 years, for as long as we live. So it moved that weight away and allowed government to be able to move. But the other part of the bill, which I'm quite frankly more excited about, that never got any play in it, was to the market side of it, to the market, getting our product to market, which meant it got our businesses off and running today, not months and years away. Now, I want you to think about this. See that wall over there and see that wall over there? Visualize this space in here, the amount of time it gets to get through the process, getting your plans through the city of Phoenix. It could take months or up to years. We had one lady, it took 3 years to get through the system. That's unconscionable. Does that allow you to get your product to market? Does that allow you to get your businesses to market right away? No, it does not. So what did the bill do? It said that if you are in the private sector, you could hire your own architect, your own engineer, and you did your own plan review, your own plan inspections. You were able to, instead of taking this time here, now think, this is the time, this is lag time to get through the system, right? Now, instead of taking this time where if a third of the room is where you would have, this is the time that it would take you through the system. Now you start at that wall. You now decide how fast you want to open your business and how quickly. So now, halfway third of the room, you start your construction phase. You can get those individuals up and running. Now they're back in the market. They're already starting looking for other jobs. They're doing other jobs. Now, right where the gentleman with the blue shirt is, now all of a sudden, this area, you start your employee, you start hiring here. Under the system we have today, you hire at that wall. You hire beyond that wall to get started. So now just think of what that does to the economy and how it jumpstarts the economy and how we start pumping dollars into our economy because people are now hired earlier and businesses can prosper and get started earlier. They start hiring more. And then you know who in turn gets to do well? We do too. Government does. We can then start making sure our employees are taken care of if we can get people to market. So, and this is on Steve's end. You know, I'm sorry you live in California. It's beautiful, but it would be a very difficult thing, especially for someone who's got little kids, you know, because there's no future. Sorry. No, sorry. I had to say that. I just had to do it. But look at our competitor. I mean, if you look at what's happening in California, you're seeing an exodus of the population. They're leaving. Businesses are leaving there. The city of Phoenix, the state of Arizona, the valley of here, we have cost of labor is lower. Our housing is less expensive. Our utility rates are 11 to 15% better. And now they're leaving there because the state is now imposing more regulations on them because they need more money. The more regulations you put in, the more money you're going to have to retrieve out of the system because you're only thinking of yourself. If you think of others, you will do better in life. I am convinced of that. So now think about it. If you were to go and talk to a business owner in the state of California and you said, well, we're not cutting red tape. We have no red tape. You now have the ability to do things on your own, and you don't have to pay us this extortion money to get through the system in order for us to fund other things. That is the solution, folks, and that's what Senate Bill 1322 was going to do. Literally, it would have moved the city, it would have moved our valley, because others would have been able to use this. It was the most comprehensive reform package in the entire country. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be here. That's all I have to say. I'm ready to work. Thank you very much.
Much. Those are great remarks, and I would remind everybody before we start that question and answer period. Stephen's book is on sale out in the lobby on your way out, and he'll be out available to sign books. We have a DVD of Chris Christie and his talk, where he talked about a meeting with the firefighters and the fact that he went into this big room and they booed him and everything because he was working on reforming the pension system. He said, now, wait a minute, you're booing me. I'm the first guy that's ever told you the truth. The fact is your pension system is going to be gone. You think you're going to have it, but it's not going to be in the future because we can't afford it. And I'm telling you the truth, and you're booing me, and all these people who've lied to you all these years, you think of them as your friend. By the end of the evening, they were his friend. But anyway, I read a little newsletter from an economist today, as it happens, and he says, you know, there are 4 forms of capital. And years ago, you wouldn't have read this in textbooks or anything, but economists have realized that there are other things that are important to capitalism. He said there are 4 forms of capitalism. There's physical capital, machines and buildings. There's human capital. We've talked about that for years and years, educated people, people who are knowledgeable. Then he mentioned civic capital, the willingness to go out and volunteer and be active in your community. And then the last one is moral capital, whether or not you teach your kids right from wrong, people tell the truth, you do the right thing. And that's really ultimately what we're talking about here. There's an old saying, I think it was ascribed to Mark Twain, there are lies, excuse my French, but damn lies. There are also damn lies. And then there are statistics. But we're not talking about statistics here. We're talking about math. We're talking about adding and subtracting. 2 plus 2 does not equal 10. And that's the situation we're in today, trying to make 2 + 2 = 10 with the pension system. All right, now we're going to have the question and answer session. We have Todd right back here with a microphone. If you'll wait to ask your question until the microphone gets to you. And then also, please keep the question a question and short, no monologuing. I'll stop you.
And if you bear with me, this microphone is super glued to my hand, so just I'll have to hold it for you.
Okay, I've got a, okay, we'll just start right there. That's convenient.
Thank you. Brad Zinn with WesternFreePress.com. Two things I'd like to hear the panel comment on. Number one is the recent Wisconsin court decision, which I guess threw out the pension reform bill of Scott Walker. And I'm glad to hear you speak about the change from defined benefit to defined contribution. My sister used to work for an actuarial company, and I understand that. The other thing that has not kind of been mentioned is that we are going through a change in health care. And do you see in the future that we're going to have to detach health care from all of this and make health care go with the individual rather than an employer-employee benefit?
Just real quick, the health care is a bigger problem than the pensions, according to many things that I've seen. I know when I was in Orange County, one of the things they did was they took health care is not a vested benefit there in California like pensions. So pensions, we're not allowed to reform them. Theoretically, the courts have said we can't fix them going forward. I work, in the private sector. I had a pension that ended, and then at a certain rate, and starting tomorrow, it's a lower rate. We're not allowed to do that in the private sector, but they're not. But that's because it's in the public sector. But it's a vested benefit where the medical care is not vested. So you know what? Cut. That would be my argument. And if it's not vested, I think we have a better opportunity.
There seems to be a popular legal theory with the defenders of the status quo in the pension systems that there is an implied property right, that if there's a benefit that has been given or a benefit that's been implied, that it can never, ever, ever be reduced ever, ever, ever again. Under that type of logic, and I haven't seen the exact decision yet, and I think that was perhaps specific to collective bargaining today in Wisconsin. Under that type of logic, it would be if you're making $40,000 a year and your boss comes to you and says, we're under rough times here, everybody's getting a 5% pay cut. Do you have a property right to that $40,000 a year? Absolutely not. If you're paying $500 a month for your health insurance and your boss comes to you and say, we're in tough times here, we have to increase everybody's contribution to their own health care by 10%, and you're going to have to pay $550 now. Do you have a property right to that $500 payment you've been making every month for your health care? The answer would be absolutely not. Yet that is the same type of legal reasoning that is being attempted to be applied to our pension system. And briefly on health care. Absolutely, health care should no longer follow the employer but the individual. When that happens, there will be a tremendous side effect, and that will be the overall cost of providing health care will go down.
Well, I agree. No, I do believe that it should go in with the employee. The employee should be able to take that. Why should you be relying on your employer to make those decisions for yourself? I really believe that once you have the employees be able to make your own decisions, you're going to have a lot more power. And I think that we ought to be making our own decisions on a lot of things, from schools to everything else. I mean, once you start having the money follow us, you'll see a lot better changes and more productive changes. Speaker Adams also spoke about one thing about this feeling of property right. Well, it's really a sense of entitlement. Well, heck, I've been getting this for all these years. I'm entitled to that with health care. Likewise, I mean, there's that feeling within the government, within the government groups that they really believe that they're entitled to this. Well, really? Well, what about the individuals? I mean, just do the comparison. Individuals in the private sector are not getting half of what their employees are getting. We should follow the market. Whatever's happening in the market should also happen on the government side. And I want you to think about that. It's more than just a philosophical reason. It's also a practical reason. Because if we follow the market with compensation, with salaries, with health benefits, with pension, then we are now vested in what you do. Right now, we are not vested in you being successful. We're not vested there. So the minute we become more like everybody else in the private sector, the more vested we are to make sure that you are successful. Plans will not sit on our desk any longer. We're going to make sure that you get things done. So the more we can move to where everything is treated fairly, everybody is treated the same, where compensation levels, all levels, pensions, everything is done exactly the same as what's in the marketplace, will you start seeing more activity in the public sector?
Designed around the idea that the public employee had a property right to the job. That's actually
Right. Todd, why don't you come over to the middle? Right here.
Okay. I'm running for Tempe City Council, and every time I ask a question, they say that's covered by a contract, that's covered by a contract. So I'm not hearing any solutions here because everything is covered. Even the MOUs, the contracts for the unions, they do behind closed doors, and it's done before we even know it's done. So there's no way to stop the system. Now, I have two thoughts. Can we convert our police to using Maricopa sheriffs? Yes. Okay, and what else can we do to stop the unions? I mean, we need to bust the contracts and get the money to the workers.
Well, the one thing that Steve talked about, and that really would be a fundamental change, and it's so funny, when he was talking, I'm like, gosh, I'm seeing it already. I mean, the same things are happening. You have City of Phoenix employees negotiating against City of Phoenix employees. So whatever I give you, there's a good likelihood I'm going to have to get too. So what incentive do you have? We have an entire department that negotiates at the City of Phoenix for employee negotiations. At the very least, there's a conflict of interest there. That should be done by entities on the outside. But, quite frankly, with the city manager we have right now, we would end up hiring somebody that would probably do the same thing anyways. It's not until there's a fundamental change in the way we do business, and the only way you're going to do business is when your voice is louder than the union voices. That's it. Because if you show, we cut in the city, I got to mention this real quick and I'll get off, but we were to cut, I think, close to 447 vacant positions. We had about 100 to 150 union members show up at City Hall saying you cannot cut those vacant positions. Vacant positions. So now if there was one person there, just think of what showed up. Now, literally, you're going to have to start getting active. And you know what? You can no longer accept mediocrity from us. You can't. How many of you think, well, it's government, it's going to take time? Don't do that. Think higher. We are your employees. We're not your employees. You are ours. I'm sorry, the other way around. I'm already brainwashed. I'm being brainwashed. But literally, we've got to change the way we think. And you got to start firing us. If we don't do it, fire us. Get rid of us.
One thing I found is it's really hard, obviously, to win majorities, especially in California on city councils. But I found that if you have one person on the council, just get one person on every board, when they're in closed session, they'll contact people in the media and they'll blow the whistle. And we've had a number of events like that when I was at the newspaper, and they say, "Hey, do you know what they're doing? I'm allowed to tell you what they're doing. I'm not allowed to tell you the details." And that's enough to change the world if you have one person who's in those closed session who thinks like a taxpayer rather than like a you fill in the blank.
Byron, maybe we can get a question from the other side.
Yeah, right here.
You have a question from the other side?
Right.
My hat's off to Mr. Adams for your following the lead by example, which is the Marine Corps officer model, ductus exemplum. I would, with you turning down the generous retirement that the state has, I would have a question for Mr. Diciccio. Are you going to pledge to do the same thing that Mr. Adams did and lead by example and turn back that pension?
Well, I pay it back every year, and I sent a letter, and I've got a letter that went to the pension board that said, I no longer want this. They said, there's no way because you're already vested. It was illegal. So,
And on that point,
I pay it back every year.
on that point, I was able to withdraw prior to the vesting period, which is why I was able to refuse.
There's a gentleman right up. Yeah. The next one right up front.
Me?
Go ahead. You go ahead, but then the next one will be this gentleman right up front.
Sal, this isn't meant to embarrass you, but I had, I won't call it the pleasure, but I attended the Phoenix City Council meeting Tuesday. And I'm kind of a numbers nut, and I'm always digging into something. And I've been trying to get in and find out what is really going on with the City of Phoenix retirement system, coppers. I am unable to get information. What is your position in terms of dealing with that bureaucracy called the city in getting information that you need to do your job?
Well, yeah, exactly. Speaker Adams just said that's a chore in itself. The odds of you getting the information you need are slim. I'm just maybe a little bit step higher than that because they know what I'm going to use. I'll give you an example. We were talking about merit pay earlier and longevity pay. Since January 11, I had asked, what are these merit longevity pay raises and bonuses going to be given to our employees? 2 hours before the vote, the city manager handed me the information and the rest of the council. You cannot get the information in time because they know you're going to be breaking up the system by letting the public know what's going on. You deserve the right to know what is happening with your government, your money. We have an obligation to make sure and a responsibility to make sure that you get that information. It is not happening. So Chet, I'll help you as much as I can, but literally it takes me months, almost 5 months to get the information.
Hi, my name is Ron McCullough. I'm a Scottsdale City Councilman, and I would stipulate to all of the problems that you pointed out. Unlike Phoenix, Scottsdale is in the state retirement system, and we have both inside and outside legal opinions that the challenge of getting out of the pension plan is as bad as you said. We've been told that it's virtually impossible. So the obvious question to a student of the pension plan problems, which I consider myself to be, is why, Mr. Adams, I'll direct this to you, you're the best position to answer it, why didn't you refer this to the voters? You hear the applause that there is every time there's some mention of reform, and I think that that is the same feeling that most of the public has. It doesn't have to be at the Goldwater Institute.
Great question, and it requires a brief explanation on the background that you're talking about. In 1998, the unions did an initiative that passed out the ballot box, which changed the Arizona Constitution, and they added language in there that there shall be no diminishment to pension benefits. Now, they often will quote that. They forget to quote the other part of that constitutional provision as well. And that serves as a handcuff on the legislature and the governor from making reforms to existing members in the pension system. And it was designed specifically to do that. That's why they got it passed. When we wrote Senate Bill 1609, we wrote around that as much as we possibly could to reform the existing system. And then we made major reforms on a prospective basis for new employees coming in because we were handcuffed by that particular constitutional provision, which frankly is why we weren't able to go all the way to a defined contribution benefit plan like we would like to do. That would need to be referred back to the ballot. Typically, in matter of standard practice, legislature does not refer things to the ballot in the off year, but only during the election year. And that's not always been the case, and there's been exceptions that have been made. I will tell you that had I remained in the legislature, that certainly would have been on the agenda for the next year. We were waiting, though, to see the results of the study and the recommendations from the Treasurer's office before we know what to go forward with next. You have to know what that next thing is and what that would look like on the ballot. And we simply don't have that information yet.
Why don't we get a question from Mr. Greenhut?
Anybody?
Since he flew 1,000,000 miles to come here to talk to us.
We got one down front here.
What do you feel? Let me preface this real quickly. I don't think the courts will support any of the things that need to be done to reform the system. I think they're actually against that happening. What do you think in the logical conclusion of not being able to reform any of the expenditures and we're buried under debt? What's the logical conclusion as you see it?
Yeah, that's a fun one. I've been going around and around, and I did a column where after San Francisco rejected Proposition B, which would have, all it would have done is require that police and fire contribute what they're required to contribute and haven't been contributing, and it failed. And then Moody's, I guess, downrated the city, and I wrote that maybe the financial markets will put some pressure. And then I got a scathing email from David Crane. Well, scathing, it wasn't a nice email, but he's really brilliant. He was Governor Schwarzenegger's former pension advisor, and he said no, because in California, the first dibs on the budget are Prop 98, Education Initiative, and the second then is going to be debt service and then public employees. So nobody's worried about it. It's not going to come from the financial market. So then we're trying to think, what is going to happen? Well, I go up to the legislature and I go to these hearings, and the unions act as if nothing has changed. They act as if the world is coming to an end in just modestly reforming pensions moving forward. I mentioned before the stripping pensions from people convicted of working their entire careers for the mafia. That's the end of the world. So I'm thinking in California, you know, with the Democrats have pretty close to a 2/3 majority. It's not, and we have a governor who was elected with $30 million in independent expenditures from the unions, probably the best buy they ever made. And so what's going to happen? So it's either going to be an initiative, and in California, the voters on initiatives tend to be more conservative than they are in the elected officials they choose. Thank the Lord for that. And so we're going to have that possibility, but just running out of money. I mean, the state isn't going to go bankrupt. We're not allowed to go bankrupt in their efforts to stop that. Municipalities maybe start going bankrupt. I think that a lot of people just think that the economy is going to come roaring back and it's going to fix the problem, but the hole's way too big to fix the problem. Even if I forget the number, but someone figured it out. Even if it's performing at a 15% or more rate of return, it's not going to fix the problem. We're going to run out of money. I think we're going to get different court decisions. I mean, judges see what's happening. If there already discussion by certain municipalities that we just can't pay the pensions, Placentia said, well, sorry, we don't have the money. Well, and the Little Hoover Commission, which is a government agency, said, you know, if the money's not there, it's not there. You can't pay it. We have to reform the system. So I think the running out of money combined with some initiatives and local initiatives in California have been doing really well on pension reform. I think that's where we're going to get, and then maybe the economy will come back enough. That's the positive scenario best I could come up with.
Where are we going to find the political constituency to offset the union power? I mean, the reference to the taxpayers or the voters is really kind of an amorphous reference. I mean, in terms of you, Speaker Adams, and perhaps Mr. Fingerhut, if you have, what in your experience have been the constituencies that you would say you would like to come forth, particularly you, Speaker Adams, to support your kind of effort? Where would you look for that, other than saying, well, it's the taxpayers or the voters? Is there a natural constituency out there?
I would hope that there is, and let me give you one possible idea. When you look at the state budget, over half of the state budget goes to the education system, K-12 education system, state of Arizona. To the extent that we continue to pay more into the pension systems, to the extent that those liabilities continue to be large, ultimately that will continue to have a detrimental effect on the money that goes into the education system. You can look at other social services, look at anything else that ends up being cut to balance the budget, while at the same time we're unable to make the reforms that we really need to make within the state pension system. I would think that there could potentially be an alignment of interests with those groups that have an interest in those areas. But really, and I know it sounds amorphous, but ultimately this is going to take the people. I really believe that if people really understood the disparity between public sector government pensions versus private pensions, if they really understood it, they'd be down at our capitals with pitchforks, demanding change. But pensions are very complicated. I mean, I brought a chart here, which we did the best that we could to simplify the changes that we did, and we only included some of them. It's an incredibly complicated system. And we're also hampered by the over-emotionalism that is used on this topic, particularly as you start talking about police and fire. But we really do have to rely upon the people, and we have to continue to educate them so that they understand that there are two classes of retirees, those with a government retirement and those without. And when they really understand that, I think the political momentum will be there.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, but before we do, I want, number one, to thank our guests for coming here and enlightening us. Second, I want to point out that while I get to stand up here and look pretty to all you people, we have a lot of staff that puts this thing together. Michael Pfeiffer, Misty Wickheiser-Jernigan, several others that I'm not going to take the time to name, but the Goldwater staff works really hard. I get to kind of come up with ideas, and it just happens. It's so magical. It's wonderful. And they work really hard. And then finally, how many of y'all like the food this evening? That was a third of the cost of what it would have cost to go to Costco, because our intern, Megan Teague, stand up, Megan. She put all that together for you, and I want you to know she is a true Renaissance woman. She is a budding economist, obviously a good cook, and she was on a national championship soccer team, NCAA Division II. So, you know, hey, you get only the best here. All right, one last question.
Okay, I just want to preface my question before I ask it to Speaker Adams.
Make it quick.
I'm going to make it quick, but I just want to say, when you hear a lot of stuff about the pensions in Arizona, you really need to separate out the state pension from some of the others that were really underfunded. And actually the median wage or pension for a state employee right now is $15,300. That's the median. It's not the average, but that's half the people are that. So when people hear that state employees are getting rich, I worked there for 22 years before I was laid off 2 years ago. Believe me, I'm not getting rich. And state employees pay for 75 to 80% of their health care when they leave state retirement. And the state is number one in being fully funded, the state retirement, and fully funded in its health care. So we're not at the bottom. We're not anywhere near it. Now, my question is this. If you have this study committee and they come up and decide, and I've looked at Utah's system, at least I've looked at some of the stuff, the language of the study committee said they're going to look at putting not only new employees, but existing employees into a defined contribution plan. If you do that, and I know the state of Kentucky studied putting new ones in, and they figured out it was going to cost them $8 billion over the next 20 years. But if this state went to a defined contribution for existing employees, how could you possibly pay for the people's pensions that are going to be coming due for what they've earned now and what future without having a constitutional amendment and trying to slash pension benefits for existing employees?
That's a great question, and that's the exact reason why we needed to make sure that we had the study done so we could understand what the transition costs are in the short run. What we do know, in the long run, going to defined contribution as opposed to defined benefit will save the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. But you bring up an excellent point, by the way. ASRS, which is the system that you're referring to, is the most funded of all the plans. It's 78% funded. At the actuarial value, it is 78% funded. At its market value, it's much, much less, meaning if they were to sell their assets today, what would they have left over to pay their actual liabilities? Furthermore, when you look at the other systems, like the public safety system, the so-called PSPRS system, They are only funded at 66% actuarial value. They're in the 50s when it comes to market value. And the worst system of all, the elected official system, is funded at 64%. At market value, it's closer to 45% funded. So, you know, we can have all kinds of arguments about what we should do or what we shouldn't do, and that's the argument that we should be having. What we shouldn't be arguing about is doing nothing at all, because those systems are on a path to self-destruction without those types of reforms.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. That's it for the program. We end on time and we start on time.